Hey, what's up guys, it's Adrian from Zulu, and today I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about environmental fog in Cinema 4D and Octane. Alright guys, so creating fog in Octane, when I first started Octane and trying to do fog, it wasn't very intuitive. Like, there's many different ways that you can kind of do it. I'm just going to show you probably the two main ways that I've seen people do. Like, for instance, Beeple uses a completely different way of creating atmosphere fog, and it's something that like not a lot of people would kind of know unless you fiddle around with shaders and come across it by accident. But I mean, before Octane even had fog, this was the way that you would do it. So I'll start off by showing you guys that technique first. So what I'm going to start off by doing is import my objects that we want to create a scene from. So then we can put some fog into the scene and have a bit of depth and something to play around with. So my good friends at Kitbash 3D have given us a free sample kit. So you go to their website, the link will be in the description below. Put in your email, they'll send you out a free kit. They're really awesome. They do a lot of different architectural styles, packs and stuff. So if you're trying to create like post-apocalyptic scenes or something, you have those base buildings to build that from. So yeah, awesome stuff. Go check them out. I've links in the description below. So what you start off by doing is import their OBJ file. So once that comes up, the OBJ import window will pop up. What you would want to do is actually in the splitting method, so I think by default it says combined. What you want to do is check objects, so that way it brings everything in separate objects in your object manager. And when that loads, it just takes a little bit. Once that loads in, it should put everything in a null from whatever file you open. The file name will be up there. And then you'll have all your separate objects in your scene like so. So what we want to probably use today is just the high-rise building. So I will grab that object. So it is the tower building. So all the faces and everything that are in that object will be tower 02, windows back, windows right, windows left, windows front. And I believe there should be some more there, which is the very final tower 02. Sorry, yeah. So grab all these, separate them out from that null, probably delete the rest. Now we've got this building. I'm just gonna hit Alt G to put all of that into a null, rename that as like tower. So now you've got your object that we're gonna clone in our scene, just to get some base geometry to then put fog on top of. So open up our live viewer. Let's chuck that over there. So now we've got our two views to look through. So now we've got that object separated out. I just want to quickly create a black kind of metal texture just so we can see some reflections in our scene. So what I did there was just created an Octane Shader through here, and then you change that from diffuse to glossy. Let's make just a black metal, kind of matte finish metal. So the diffuse, drag that down to black. Specular, keep that normal. Roughness, let's put it up to something like 0.25, 0.3. So it gives it that like matte finish kind of nice metal effect. And I'm happy with that. So let's drag that onto our null. Our tower null, now that will be a black building. So I'm going for something kind of stylized today, nothing too fancy. So what I'm going to do is create a HDRI environment. So then that will come into the scene, and let's hit render. So now that just gives us the default lighting in our scene just to play around with for now. Cool, so we've got this building. I'm happy with the reflections. It's looking kind of nice, how you get a nice contrast in tones. Cool, so let's actually start cloning this into our scene. So what you can do is then go to MoGraph, choose your cloner, drag that down to the bottom. So I'm going to name this just to keep organized. I'm going to name it Tower Clone. So everyone knows what that is. Drag your clone cloner object into the cloner and make that a child of that cloner. So now what you can do is actually, I would check render instances, which makes it faster because it's not duplicating the geometry, it's just referencing the geometry. And then what I would do is make that linear. I'll probably change that to grid array. Change it, so this would be your X, Y, Z. So what I want to do is take the Y into, put that as 0, just so it's like across the plane you have buildings along the floor. So if we hit the tower and then hit S on our keyboard, it will focus up. Sorry, if I hit the cloner and hit S, it will focus everything in our scene. So then let's go for something like 15 in the thing, 15. Sorry, you want to make that, make the middle one 1 so that it's only one plane. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. So that's too many. I'm going to bring that back to like 10. So we're going for like a weird kind of post-apocalyptic city kind of scape. Or like something like a regime where it's like North Korea and then you have all the same buildings. It's creepy as fuck. Cool. So then what I'm going to do is change the endpoint to 300. So what I'm doing is just spreading out these buildings a bit. So in that Z, I'm going to do the same so that it spreads it out in a gridded array. Alright, let's create a camera. So if you go search up here for Octane camera, that will bring in, let's just drag that over there for now, and drag our live viewer over as well. So we've got these two. Let's create a camera, look through this camera, and then let's pick a shot. So if you lose your scene again, hit select your cloner and hit S on your keyboard and it brings it right back. Let's just like pick a shot that looks kind of cool. And we just want to try and make the most out of our fog in our scene. So if you want to get better at compositions in your scene, what I would do is select your camera and go to composition, hit grid, so that will put like thirds into your viewport. So that way you can kind of like get some nice focal points of 2 different places and just really make your scenes look really nice. So I'm going to choose a high angle shot that kind of makes this scene look somewhat infinite. Go for something like that. So we've got this building here, this nice focal point on the third. You can probably move that up so the top of the building's on that third. And then you have all this like perspective going in 2 directions there, which is going to look really nice with the fog once you finish. So I like that shot for now, so I'm just going to put a protection tag on that so I can't move the camera by accident, and let's work from that. So the fog, to start off with, let's go and create a shader, Octane material. Open this up in your material editor. I'm not going to muck around with the node editor today just because I'm not using external textures, it's all just procedural. So I'll change this from diffuse to specular. And then what I'll do is start off by changing my index to 0, or to 1, sorry. That will disappear, but don't worry, that's fine. You just don't want any type of refraction on your glass material because we're going to put a medium for scattering, and what that will do is scatter any light that passes through this object. So let's go in this texture tab, drop it down, go to Octane, put in a scattering medium. And then inside that, for absorption, you want to put a RGB spectrum, and then copy that and put that into the second tab here. So what that does is just link it all up to Octane. You've got these 2 RGB spectrums. I don't think it matters what color or gradient, what shade of gray these are. That's fine. All you're worried about for now is probably the density. Sorry, my headset is just falling off my head. So the density, you want to drag it down until you see something here that kind of represents fog. So something around like 9 or something would be good as a starting point. Okay, so that's your fog shader basically set up. And that's how it works. What I would do is turn on fake shadows just because I do know if you don't turn this on, your shadows on your floor planes or wherever else, you won't actually have any shadows. So let's go ahead and quickly create a floor plane as well, because we don't have one in our scene. Let's get out of that camera so we can view our scene. Just make sure everything's sitting. Change our display to hidden line so we can see the geometry. Alright, so everything's sitting nicely on that floor plane. I'm just going to texture it the same, keep it monochrome. Yep, so it's all nice and black. You got these nice reflections. Let's go back to our shot. Make sure the floor plane is big enough to cover the whole entire scene. We don't want any edges there. So hit T on our keyboard, scale that up. Cool, now we got a nice shot with some cool reflection. I'll probably, just for effect, create, probably duplicate that black texture and turn the roughness down a bit, so then we got like a more of a reflective plane. And what I'll do is drag that onto our plane, and then we should get some more nice reflections into that. Probably go a bit lower with that roughness even. See more detail. Cool, so we got this detail coming into that now. That's cool, I'm happy with that. For now, let's focus back on the first technique of fog. So I'm going to create not a sphere, it's going to be a cube. Go out of my camera just so I can go around my scene a bit better. And what you want to use this cube for is going to be your fog container. So you got to make sure that this whole fog container is big enough to go across your whole scene, but not too big to go over your camera, because with this technique there's a problem with fog that if your camera is inside this fog box, it won't actually register properly. So what you need to do is make sure your camera is on the outside, and again, make sure the fog box is covering your whole entire scene, every bit of geometry that you can. So now what I'll do is drag that fog onto the cube. So if you view from this camera, now we have fog happening. As you can see, it's very, very thick fog at the moment. It's looking nice, like you can tell it's really working well. I'll probably go into my Octane settings and drag that out to the thing. And as you can see, we're using diffuse, direct lighting and ambient occlusion at the moment. So fog generally works better with path tracing. It becomes more realistic and you get a lot more depth into your fog. So what we're going to do is change the CG clamp to 1. That gets rid of any hotspots in your scene. Sometimes you don't want to go too extreme with this because it will actually darken things in your scene. And then the max samples 1000 just for viewing purposes. Cool. So the fog, generally you just need to worry about the medium channel, right? So the scattering medium, this is where your density will actually give your fog distance. So if we put this down, you'll start seeing more things being introduced into your scene. This is a technique I learnt from people, actually, out of everyone. I noticed that even though in Octane 3 there's a fog fog node that you can bring in called Octane Fog Volume, even though that exists, he still always likes to use this method of fog. It seems to be one of the only methods that I've been able to get true light rays happening as well. But yeah, hopefully I can show you how to get convincing God rays happening in a later tutorial or part 2. But for now, let's just focus on this fog. So I'm trying to balance it so that the back buildings are just barely visible. So what I'll do is drag that up until I can't see the back buildings as much. So even that's too much. So let's just balance that into our scene. Nice. So now we've got that really nice gradient of being visible to barely visible. I like that, so I'm going to leave it at 0.9, probably round that off just because I like round numbers. No reason why, just because. Cool, so I've got this shot and I really like it. So what I want to do is put in some lighting. So let's fake a sun and kind of get some nice spill into the scene and brighten up that fog. because by default, obviously the fog is going to take on whatever light is in your scene. The color will come from your lighting as well. So let's bring in an Octane area light, drag that out onto our bar so it's easily there. Click the Octane area light. Alright, so obviously this is way too bright. Another thing I'm going to tell you is what you want to do is actually turn this off in your viewport. So turn that traffic light off, the top one, just so you can see in your scene, but leave it on for your render so it renders the fog into your thing, into your render. So this lighting obviously is way too bright. So what I'm going to do is rotate that around, hit the area light tag, bring down the power until it's kind of like something as if a sun would be in the sky. Let's just try balance that in, be something around 25. So it's bright, but it's not too bright. Actually, it's probably too bright. Let's bring that down to 10. Cool. So we got that nice light spill happening in our scene. So what you can do actually to fake a sun is actually go to Octane light tag, go to details, change the area shape to disk. So I've got this sun in my scene. I want to kind of position it so I've got some nice lighting happening. And go into my side view. I'm going to angle it down so it's kind of pointing down onto the buildings. I'm going to make sure it's out of my fog box container. So if we look at this, it's out of the fog box. I think that really affects the God rays as well. If that's inside, it doesn't react as well as it should. So we've got this lighting. We're going to pull it on the diagonal. Oops. Kind of create some dramatic lighting, I guess. So you can already see that's looking kind of nice, the gradient from the light into the scene. And because I dragged that a bit backwards and out, so I'm going to drag it down so it's more of a dynamic angle kind of into the shot, making sure it is outside the fog box container. Keep going a little bit. Alright, cool. So let's go back to our scene, and obviously that's just, it's not bright enough anymore because I've moved it back and the fall off isn't actually hitting the scene. So what I'm going to do is drag the power up until I start seeing that lighting kind of introduced from one side to the other. So now it's kind of brighter over here, darker over here. So that gives you that like realistic, there's a sun in the scene effect, quote unquote. You can turn it up even more. It's probably a bit too much. Let's bring it down to like 300. I like that. So what I would do now is if you were animating your camera and you kind of wanted that sun effect as if the sun was thousands of miles away, I would drag that Octane light and parent it to your camera. So if you're animating this camera, that lighting will always stay consistent on that angle and your lighting won't change. It would just act as if there's a sun there. What I would also do, because your camera has to stay outside of your fog box, I would drag that fog container and parent it to your camera. So that way, let's just get rid of this protection tag. That way, if you move through your scene, the fog will actually always keep that offset. So, I mean, for now, that's a very convincing start. Like, that's just one technique of fog. What you can do is bring this into After Effects and do a contrast curve. What a contrast curve will do, if you put the blacks down darker and the highlights lighter, you'll be clamping your fog so there's less kind of gradient between, or more gradient depending on what angle you go. So this is just one technique. I'm going to turn that fog off and we'll focus on a second technique. So another technique that you can use is if you go into your live view and go to objects, you'll have this Octane Fog Volume node. So once you click that, it will come into your object manager, and what you'll see is this container. And what you'll have to do is scale this up through your scene. The good thing about this technique is that you don't have to make sure it's outside of your camera. It will always kind of stay true to how fog would react with the camera. Like you can be in the fog and it won't actually change a thing. So if we go, let's just like show you an example of that. If I put that over the camera's lens, scale that up, you'll see the fog is still working and it doesn't go completely transparent. So in this volume tag, they'll have a medium channel. So this volume medium channel here, if you click into that, will have a density, and obviously the absorption and scattering is predetermined by these two values, the RGB spectrums. So that's already set up. What you can do is drag that density down until you start getting this fog. So as you can see already, this fog is really different to the other technique. It reacts differently. So if I had that at the same value as the other one did, it's completely different. It doesn't even look the same. So if you drag this up, you can see that obviously it's a good technique of bringing in fog, but to me it's probably a bit too overdone. You can't get some nice like gradients between stuff. So let's drag this fog back. So that the other buildings, maybe we'll take the beginning buildings out of the fog. Hit T on your keyboard, scale this up so it's a bigger fog box, and cover those buildings. And then what I'm going to do is actually go to the generator tab. I'm going to edge feather this so that we get like a bit more of a gradient from the outside to the back. So now we've got a nice feather so that some of the fog is here and more fog is in the background. And then what I'm going to do is probably up the density. So the back buildings are actually being covered and you can't see that shot. I'm going to go back to my camera, take the protection tag off and angle this down. Okay, sorry, I'm going to use the viewport here because this is bugging out. Angle this down so you can only see some buildings. Let's just turn this off in my viewport so I can see what's going on. Yeah, I want to angle it down so that that floor plane is out of sight. By the looks of things, it's not in the render anymore. Go a little bit further down. Cool. Happy with that. Let's protect that again. So this is just another technique of doing fog as well. I mean, you can play around with the different absorptions and scattering to get some different looks. Like usually the RGB spectrum for absorption can like dramatically change the color of your fog. So if you want a more brighter absorbing fog of light, so this light is making it brighter because the fog's being absorbed. I mean, this looks really nice for now as well. Say you wanted the tops of the buildings to not be in fog and you just want like a ground fog. What you can also do with this is, let's turn it back on. What you can do is actually drag this down so the tops of the buildings are kind of poking through. I would Control Z that and only move it, not scale it. So by clicking on the green arrow, Control Z, bring it back, go down so that the tops of the buildings are kind of poking through this fog. So then what we're creating, because of that feather, it's got this nice gradient from top to bottom. Now we're creating that ground fog. So I guess that concludes another technique of creating fog in Octane. I won't go too in depth with this one because it's very fiddly. You just play around with it until you like what you see, I suppose. So going back to having no fog, let's delete those fog boxes. So there's actually a third technique which isn't really well known that you can do with After Effects or any of your compositing programs. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and render this shot and also render a Z-depth pass. So to do that, you have to go to your render settings, turn on Octane, so it's rendering with Octane Render Engine, go down to Octane Render, turn on your render passes. I usually use TIFFs just because I like having single images. I'm going to show my passes. Save beauty checked on. Multi-layer file, check that off so that you have separate passes that come into the file. I'm going to change my tone map to tone mapped. I do know if you don't have that set to, if you have that set to linear, sometimes your Z depth won't actually render out correctly. So now what I'm going to do is go to info passes, make sure Z depth is checked on. And then if I get my info, toggle info in here, you'll be able to select your main layer, which is your main render, and your Z depth as well. So this Z depth actually came in pretty well. Looks like there's a nice gradient from black to white in my scene. What you can do to change this is you use your Z depth max. So what that does is actually clamp the values from back to start. So say I wanted really extreme fog in my scene when compositing, this is like a step later, but if I wanted extreme fog, I would have less Z depth max, so there's less distance that the camera can see. So for example, if I have this all the way probably until you have a solid white color at the back of your scene, you will get the full spectrum to play with of your scene. So this is good. I'm going to keep that at 4. That's a good Z depth for me. So I'm going to actually go ahead, make sure I have Z depth selected. My beauty is going to save out as well. And what I'm going to do is set up a place to render this. Let's just render that into that file. And just render that out there. So I'll catch you guys back when this is finished rendering. Alright, so once you've imported both your Z depth and your main pass into your compositing program, whatever that may be, it will come up with a pop-up window in After Effects saying, do you want to bring it in as straight unmatted or matted? So you just click OK, whatever it has by default is right. So this fog pass and this main pass, you want to select them both, drag it into a new composition, click OK. It doesn't matter the length because we're using a still right now. If you want to focus up your scene, I would hold shift and then question mark. That will focus up your scene. So what we're going to do with this main pass is actually color correct it. Because I do a lot of 2D animation, I don't actually have After Effects set up in a linear color space, just because 2D animation is, there's no point in having it as a linear color space unless you're using, I don't know why you would. So I'm going to do a quick gamma correction on this. If you really want to set up your linear space in your other stuff, you can. So yeah, gamma 2.2. Probably bring that just down to 2 because it's way too bright. And then my Z depth fog pass, let's bring that up top so I can see that. What you want to do now, this is another way of creating fog, right? So this Z depth pass has every single object matted. Basically, it's a matte for your scene. So back here, you want to use this as a opacity channel. So we want to be able to see our toggle switches part. So I drag that window up and then change the toggle switches on. This Z depth pass, we want to matte our main pass so that it has a transparency in it, right? So these back buildings, we want them to be the opacity gray value of these buildings we see here. So if we actually go to our track matte settings, change this down to Luma matte, sorry, alpha matte, make sure we've got our grid selected, or our toggle transparency grid selected, and we want to use Luma matte, probably Luma matte inverted, because we want the back buildings to be fogging out. So the front buildings will be more opaque than the back buildings. So now if you bring in a new layer and a solid, right, and if you wanted that fog to be a kind of pinky reddish value, and then if you drag that down to the bottom, you'll see we've got this now atmosphere fog happening. So another way as well to dial in your fog a bit more is bring in a curves. So if you want the fog, you chuck that onto your z-depth, fog z-depth. So yeah, what you can do is bring in, let's turn that on so we can see what we're working with. Say you wanted brighter fog in the background, you would clip the whites to bring more fog into the scene. So that's bringing more white fog into the scene. And then if you want the front to be more visible as well, you can contrast curve that and have the blacks more black. So if we bring that down to about there, this is going to be 100% visible, the background's not. So let's clip that white again so that the back buildings are barely visible. So if you can see there, let's zoom in on that. You can see this is the building we're focusing on because it's the very back of our scene. We want that to just be barely visible, so we drag this white back until that's fogged out. And now if we hit shift question mark, it will focus up our scene again, and then we turn that off. You'll see there's more fog in your scene. For example, if I just show you with the normal scene, you can actually dial in this fog. This gives you a lot more control with compositing. So if you want thicker fog in the background, just drag that highlight value over. If you want brighter buildings in the foreground, less fog distance, like if you want a wall of fog that's just kind of coming into your scene, you can drag it like that. Or if you want fog across all of your scene, you drag this bottom one up so that the front of the buildings will actually have fog over them now. And then the back buildings, you drag that back. So we've got that nice gradient of fog. And then whatever medium you want here, you can also do like gradients. Just get some more variance in your scene. Chuck this gradient onto your solid. Let's change that to something like a sunset-ish kind of color there, and more of an orangey kind of sunset tone. Change this to radial, and you can see you get some like really cool effects. You change the radial from, probably set that back there. You can fully customize your fog with this technique. Like it's really cool and dynamic, I suppose. Gives you a lot of control when you want to composite some things. Another thing you could do, so let's get rid of that gradient map. We'll just use this color tone. Go to our solid settings. Let's make that like a kind of stormy-ish kind of deep blue color. Less saturated, I guess. It's like a stormy day, it's cold. Keep that color. What you can do as well is put in a noise. So we put a noise, fractal noise onto that solid, and then we want to turn the opacity down, so we're kind of putting in some clouds. Probably bump up the contrast. Now we've got kind of cloudy fog, right? Looks a bit dodgy though, doesn't it? So again, I want to change this back so that there's no clouds in the front. And then there's just some clouds in the background. So you can just dial that in. So now we've got this like cloudy kind of fog. You can change the way, there should be a transform node. So you can actually change the scale of this fog. If you want big clouds in your scene, just drag this up. Now you've got like towers inside of the fog. So what I would do is pump up that back until I get more fog into the scene. Yeah, I mean the possibilities are pretty endless, like for compositing fog into your scene with this this technique. So I mean, that pretty much wraps up the 3 different techniques that I use to introduce fog into my scenes. I hope you guys learned something. Just keep in mind these are the way that I would do things. There's many probably different ways as well on top of that. So hope you guys enjoyed. Check out our Instagram and website for updates every week on cool, interesting things, and that's zulu8.com.au. Cheers guys, and have a good one.